Hi everyone, it's Dr. Z. Welcome to another episode of Next Up Narcissism. Today we have a very special guest. We have Charlie Webster with us. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Charlie's work, she is responsible for hosting, producing, writing the top international podcast, Scamanda, which was the #1 show of 2023 and the most downloaded, shared, and listened to podcasts on Apple worldwide. In addition to that, the documentary Scamanda, which was the most streamed premiere ever for ABC News Studios. I am so excited to speak to Charlie about her interactions with Amanda Riley, with her reasoning behind bringing Scamanda to a podcast and to a docuseries, and what it is about this particular woman, Amanda Riley, and her faking of cancer, specifically lymphoma. What it was about this that everybody was so attracted to. What was it about this story that just really captured this massive audience? So I think that this if you haven't seen it, watch it. If you haven't listened to it, listen to it. But we're going to get into it, and I have a ton of questions for Charlie, and really kind of break down this behavior, this just absolutely bizarre behavior. Enjoy. Hi everyone, it's Dr. Z. Welcome to another episode of Next Up Narcissism. So today I have Charlie Webster with me, who, for those of you who don't know who she is, I will hand it over to you in a second. She was, I should go back, had the top international podcast, Scamanda, which was the #1 show of 2023, not just the most downloaded, but the most shared, the most listened to on Apple worldwide. She was the host, producer, writer, all of it. And then Scamanda, having the same name, was recently an ABC, Hulu, and Disney Plus worldwide most streamed premiere docuseries ever for ABC News Studios. That's pretty exceptional. So before we get into Scamanda and really kind of break this down, I'm going to just kind of hand it over to you, tell everybody who you are, and then get into how you got involved in this story in the first place.
Thank you for saying those things, because even though I know them and I've heard them many times, it's still,
I did that.
It kind of still makes me like tears in my eyes, like blush and kind of be like, oh, and also I'm English, so we're a bit like that. We're a little bit like, but no, I'm, I have to say that I'm so great, without listeners and viewers and people like yourself, it would never be what it was. So thank you for everybody for, being compelled by it and listening and spreading the word, very much like I was. So who am I? I'm a broadcaster and journalist, and as you said, a writer, producer. Sometimes it's hard to explain myself because I'm not just one thing, but I don't feel like we have to be. And my background's in journalism, and I've worked in television for 20 plus years now, and made audio documentaries, worked in radio and made television documentaries, and been on air as an anchor for a long time as well, which is where I started at the young age of 21. But I've also, written a book called Why It's Okay to Talk About Trauma, and do like a huge amount of advocacy work as well. So I'm kind of like, I don't know, I suppose wear these two hats, but for me, it's all the same thing, because everything I do is like what I really believe in and what I'm passionate about. And even with Scamanda, making that show, it very much, I do put my personal in what I do. And I think you have to, in a way, because, you live and breathe it to be able to get it across. So for me, giving victims or people a voice that have been wronged, and to help bring justice to their pain, and for that to echo to other people, around the world is really important to me. And that's very much what motivated me in my career in the first place, really. I won't talk anymore because I'll just bubble on.
No.
About my resume and my CV.
No, listen, I said, but you're brilliant, and the work that you have done is just, I mean, it spans so many years, and it's so intricate and it's so detailed, and you can tell that you really do put everything into it. Because the stories they're not easy stories. No. They are extremely complex. They are multi-layered. There are many sides. There's, as you said, many victims. It's so complicated. And I would imagine as a journalist to have to go into this almost with this kind of neutrality vibe, and to take all this information in and present it in a way that's, that people can relate to. So it's not easy at all. And so with Scamanda, which we'll get into the nuances of it, how and why was this a story that you felt so passionate about talking to the public and getting this out there?
I love what you just said about detail and nuance, because they're the stories that I love to tell, and it's all about human behavior, and human behavior is complex. And I know we love to tie it in a bow, and I know we love to go good and bad, but and
it's a dangerous place to go.
It is. And then also like how we're impacted by things that have happened to us is also really important to show, because I don't think that always comes across. So that's really important to me. And they are super nuanced and detailed, and like the amount of times that I'll spend like days and days and sometimes weeks on the most tiniest bit that you wouldn't even know, but it's so essential to like the nuance of the story. But that's why I like to tell, because I think that's what real life is. So to turn to, and that's what I like for people to connect and relate to, which is why I think people felt like that about Scamanda, the podcast, and then now the TV docuseries, and why it was so well listened and shared and viewed. So for me, when I first, I started to look at what Amanda was doing, and through her blog post, because a woman called Nancy, for people that haven't listened or seen it, she got an anonymous tip several years previously, and about this woman that was faking cancer, right? And so Nancy at the time was looking for stories, because she's a producer. She's kind of like a producer that, looks for stories and then brings that person to air, right? So very different from me. And whereas I'm a journalist, and I will like investigate and build out a story and then bring it to life to the public. And so then in the end, Nancy didn't do anything from a work perspective, but then it became very personal for Nancy. So I spoke to Nancy. We have a mutual friends connection in the industry. Not that I want to get bogged down in detail. And then I started to look through Amanda's blog post, because when Nancy mentioned it to me, I was like, this is so, I don't want to use the word crazy, but it's so great. It's so like
surreal.
Wow. Yeah, it's surreal.
Surreal. Yeah.
And the detail, like the extent that this person went to, we've seen, I don't know whether people have seen and you've seen, but Belle Gibson, for example, which is Apple Cider Vinegar and Netflix.
Yes.
Belle Gibson lied about having cancer. Amanda faked cancer. It's entirely different and far more complicated.
Yes.
So for me, seeing Amanda's pictures, so her blog posts were not just words, they were hundreds of pictures every day, every week, of her in hospital, of her with a shaved head, of with her bruises under her eyes, with medication,
connected to machines.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that, it made me go, no way. If this woman is faking cancer, then this is just, it's unbelievable. And it compelled me so much that I just was obsessed with it. Like, I was reading her blog posts. I spent an entire long weekend just sat around her blog posts, like very old school, like printed off, because I needed to see them. And I was just like, what? And Amanda's a good storyteller. Like, it was
Very,
fascinating
very smart.
read. Yeah. And then I was like, oh, I have to do something with this. And then it was very sensitive. So that's where I was like, oh, okay, I think this would make a fantastic, like, I don't know, behavioral examination type podcast documentary style audio. And the audio would help me be able to tell the nuance of the story, even though I couldn't necessarily tell it visually. I feel like the access that I got and the people that really trusted me to tell this story of the victims, I could really like pull the extent of this story or what happened to them via audio that I might not have been able to do initially visual. And then once I kind of built all that out and got the nuance of the story across, then that's when I could make it a visual story, which it does have its benefits, because obviously we then turn it to visual documentary and they go hands in hands, because the visual side of it really makes you gasp, because you're like, oh, like I was talking about that in the podcast. Now I'm showing you for real life. This is not me just like like, you know,
it's not just your
podcast.
opinion.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I agree. I think, you know, when you're dealing with these nuanced behaviors, as you said, that people often use the term otherworldly when they are talking about these types of, we'll say, manipulative behavior, which I don't even think suits this, but I'll just say manipulative behaviors, particularly in what I specialize in, narcissistic abuse. It is so difficult for survivors to explain the behaviors that were done to them, because when you try to talk about it, it's out of context. It doesn't sound that bad. And when you do bring up the nuances and the details, it seems so far-fetched that it's almost unbelievable. And I think for those of you listening who have not seen this yet, Amanda Riley was somebody who at age 27 had said that she was diagnosed with stage 3 blood cancer, with lymphoma. And through the support of her church and her family and her friends and, you know, strangers,
her
somehow her online community, through her blog posts and as you said, these pictures she's posting, all of this raised over $100,000 that we know of, to help her with her treatments and her medical care and her travel and all these expenses. And then, you know, jumping forward, as it turns out, she never had cancer. And so the podcast, the docuseries, it takes you from the beginning to the end. And, you know, the behaviors that you're talking about. And I love how you say the difference between lying about having cancer versus faking having cancer. And that's a very important distinction. Lying is one thing, but then actually engaging in the behaviors to support the lie is a whole different animal. The amount of cognitive effort and memory and energy to put into this, to the level of detail of her blog posts. I mean, I can't even keep together what I'm doing tomorrow, let alone the way her brain worked that's what really stood out to me was, God, this woman's brain, like, think about what she could have done.
A lot of people
in another,
she had a huge capacity.
Huge. In her storytelling, I mean, all of it. So why do you think people are so intrigued by Amanda's story? What is it about it that really drew this many people in? Because this drew in broke record-breaking numbers. So what do you think it was?
Well, I don't think it's one particular thing. I think the extremity of it, but the extremity of it that's so relatable. So hear me out. Like, we sometimes see big stories about these big, I don't know, like billionaires that scam people or this crypto, whatever. But to me, that's not what Amanda is. Amanda is somebody that could be in any of our communities and in any of our families and in any of our churches and in any of our schools. And, you know, the mother to anybody's kids that play with our kids, right? And whereas like this billionaire, trillionaire crypto person is not somebody I can relate to. Whereas
Correct.
I can relate to somebody like Amanda, and all of us can. But the extremity of what she did is not something that we match with that. And that's what I think is so fascinating. Because even when I was, I spent so much time with, all the victims. And I know people can be a bit funny with that word, but I know that all the victims would like me to say that because they were victims of Amanda's act. And they were victims in the case, of which she had 137 victims on record in the end. And there's people that I spoke to that aren't in the podcast and aren't in the docuseries that I spent time with, talked to, just to get an idea of Amanda. And, every single one of them, nearly every single one of them, I should say, said to me that what Amanda did doesn't match with Amanda that they knew. And that's what I think so interesting, because you try and wrap your head around the capability of what she did, but that she just looks normal. And again, she's just somebody in a local community that could be anybody's. And I think, touching on something you said about the detail, Amanda was so detailed. And it's, I have seen some people be like, oh, well, you would have known, I don't know, she had eyebrows, or she wasn't like, she still had a healthy weight on her face. But they're people that haven't really gone into the nuance of the story and haven't really listened to the podcast in detail, or the docuseries, because I can't for a second, and obviously everybody's entitled to their opinion, but I can't for a second. And, I do understand that, like, I've seen every single blog post and I've sat with people, for days and weeks and months. But I can't see how people would have necessarily known. And that's really interesting. It wasn't obvious. Again, I reiterate that when I started to look through Amanda's blog post, I wasn't like, yeah, damn, this person's faking cancer. I was like, what? Is this person? I even questioned Nancy and I was like, are you definitely sure? Like, and then I went off on my own thing and went and like spoke to people, met her friends, people to do with the church that weren't anything to do with the family, just to try and get as much information as I possibly could. Because at that point she hadn't been sentenced, and she was utterly convincing. And, people can also experience cancer or live with cancer in many different ways. Mm-hmm. There's people that are incredible, and I mean, just surviving and just, every day living with cancer is just incredible, because it just takes extraordinary strength every day to go through that. But there are people that, will run a marathon, they won't present with, very thin or gaunt. Mm-hmm. They'll present in different ways. And I think that's important to acknowledge, but also that every single day, that's your friend. That's your friends. Like, then every single day she turned up and was there with you. She inspired. And, people might not like me saying that, but it's true. She did inspire. And at the time, the way that I made the podcast, and you asked maybe why people liked it, is I did it a little bit different than the traditional way. And I took you along the journey. I tried to, as much as I could. And rather than telling you there's this person who's done this thing and she's this monster and let me tell you what she did, it was totally the opposite way around, because I was trying to demonstrate how subtle the behaviors are, which is what you said. And the reason why I wanted to demonstrate that is because I feel like if I just said to you, there's a woman who faked cancer, she stole over $100,000, you might be like, oh, okay, move on. But because that's not really of course it is what matters, but that's not the importance of this story. The importance of the story, and I know every victim will agree with me, to do with Amanda's case, is the emotional trauma, the mental impact, and the questioning of trust that it caused people, not just in other people, but in themselves. That's so detrimental. Far more detrimental, than the money. And all I was going to say is that that's the story, and that is something all of us can relate to. I know that you can, and I know that I can because of our experiences. And, you do so much work around narcissism and raising that awareness. And I feel like if I could make a documentary in Scamanda, which I did, it would maybe help even a tiny bit show people what these kind of, it's hard to use the word, right? Because there's a lot to it and it's complex, but manipulative, narcissistic, whatever words we want to use are, because it's the same behaviors that we experience in families, relationships, and friendships. And that's what I was trying to show.
I think you said that so perfectly, because it's such a hard message to convey. And I completely agree with you. And as you were saying that, I actually wrote down the word betrayal trauma, because that's exactly what happened. Yes, the money's important. Obviously, that's, like you said, that goes without saying. But what I got from this, the message in general, is because she was somebody that could be any of us, anyone we know, any of our neighbors, someone at the soccer game on the weekend, that it really, even if you weren't a victim directly, it really rocks you to your core.
Yeah, you feel it.
Because your foundation of trust and your ability to accurately judge others as good people is completely shattered. Because listen, I see this, not this specific situation, but I see this all the time with my patients, where they'll say, I thought this was somebody else, and then X, Y, and Z happened. The rug was pulled out from under me. My entire world shattered. I don't know what end is up. I can't trust anyone. And my entire view on the human condition is done. And I think you said it so eloquently, that it's not just the money. It's not just the victims. It's everybody in a way was a victim in a weird way who watched it, because the level of betrayal is, then you start thinking, do I know it? Could anyone I know? I mean, it just runs so deep. It hits you in your gut. And it's that betrayal trauma. It's hard to get past.
You know what? It just made me think when you were talking, I'd love to mention that. What about every person that is living with cancer right now? And that's another thing that I did think about so much. And a lot of people have contacted me when the podcast was released and when then we released the documentary, because that must be hard. And I think, you've got, there's so many layers to this, because then, what Amanda did, and maybe she didn't understand that because she was in her own immediate world, is, she hurt everyone by lying about something that nobody would ever wish on their worst enemy to have, and that so many of us can relate to, whether it's directly or indirectly, and have also had so much loss with that disease, with cancer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in addition to, like you said, there's so many layers. There's the money, there's if you had cancer and you experience this. The other thing I think is interesting in reading some of her quotes and some of the things that she had said, one thing that stood out to me was that she had said she went from being a nobody to being like the most hated person on social media. And I found that interesting, I'll say, that I was a nobody, suggesting that unless she had this fake persona, that she was nobody, that this somehow gave her an identity. And because she took that on, right? She took on this identity of a cancer patient, which is, offends people who have experienced cancer, loved ones, across the board. We know that. But to take on that identity and run with it, you have to, by nature, in order to do that, have I don't know if it's have no concern, no awareness, whatever you want to say, of the impact, something like that, like you said, the far-reaching impact, not just I stole money from you, but do you know how this is going to impact a child who had to witness their parents dealing with cancer, who there's so many layers to it. And so from your perspective, do you feel that it was somebody who faked having cancer, or more so that she took on this this identity, because it consumed her entire existence.
Yeah. It's a really good point. I think, I mean, she did fake cancer, but I do think that she took on the identity, and it makes me think a lot about addictive behavior. And, you know, I just remind everyone, and for those that have not listened or watched Scamanda, that I have spent a lot of time speaking to Amanda. That's not in the public arena. Amanda has not agreed to be interviewed with the podcast or the docuseries, but I've spoken to her in prison, and, you know, she's very aware of what's happened and the project. So I say all this to make sure it's communicated that I'm not just saying this from afar. Like, I have actually spent time speaking to her. And so I would say it became very validating. And, you know, she said I was a nobody, and it became something that was self-fulfilling and very addictive. And again, I'm not justifying it. We're talking about understanding and explaining it. And that's important, because the more we understand and explain, then we can start to maybe recognize why young women are doing this. Because I have an inbox, let me tell you, of Jaime, of this not being the only one. And I'm like, well, why is it all women and why is it all young women? But again, look, that's maybe another conversation. I'm not justifying Amanda's actions in any way. It's just trying to understand what makes somebody do this. And addiction to me is very much part of it, because and I've said this, you know, a few times before in the press, that if we look, you know, I've got my phone right here, right? If we look on social media and we get a like, and we get, you know, more views on our reels, and, like, you know, TikTok and Instagram and all that it does feed something in us. It's like,
it's a dopamine hit.
Yes, it's a dopamine hit. Now take that feeling, which all of us can relate to. Even my mum can relate to, because she'll sometimes sit and she's like, no, I'm not going to be scrolling through Facebook anymore. You know, like, take that and times it by a million. And that was the hit Amanda was getting when she, you know, she stood on stage and gave her talks. She had people come to her, and she was wanted, she was needed. And again, it's not okay, but if we can just for a second think about what that feeling's like. And then I think it was very hard for her to stop. And then when she did want to try and stop, she'd got herself in such a hole that I have no idea how you would. And we can all go, well, she should have stopped and it would be easy for her to stop.
It's not that easy.
Yeah, she absolutely should have. She shouldn't have even done it in the first place.
Yes.
But, you know, everybody thought that she got cancer. A whole entire, like you said, identity was having cancer. Her whole community was supporting her and friends with her as a survivor again and again and again of cancer. So she would lose everything. She ultimately did, right? But again, it's like, you know, I try and do this because it helps us understand. And I've said a million times, it doesn't mean we justify it. But, you know, if you think about a white lie, then you have to tell another lie to cover up that lie. Then you tell another lie. And then next thing you know, you've just made up this whole thing and you're just stuck in a lie. And how do you even get out of it? Again, the comparison is very extreme what Amanda did. But it's just to, you know, to think about that and go, oh, gosh. So I don't think it was premeditated. I've said that before. People might not like it, but I don't think it was premeditated. I would almost go to say that I know it wasn't premeditated, but that's because I have spent time with Amanda and I have seen things that aren't out in the public, and that it started and then it just built into this thing. I don't think for a second it was that she sat there and went, let's fake cancer. I think it built into this huge thing that she then started to believe herself, maybe, and she got so much validation and purpose from that. And, you know, what is it we're all looking for? To be needed. And I know that sounds so bad, because
no, listen,
absolutely not go and fake and lie to be needed.
Right. But here's the thing along those lines. Right. Yes, I agree with you. And for those listening, we are not saying that. One of the ways that I like to tell people to look at very dysfunctional behaviors is to look at it in terms of function. So if you look at the underlying function of addiction, of what Amanda did, of any type of manipulation, of any type of anxiety, even the underlying function of the behavior is usually the same. The way you dress it up, whether it's faking cancer, a drug, whatever the case may be, that's the behavior in which the vehicle, right? But the function is the same. And the function is to avoid feeling bad, to avoid internal discomfort. So you get that hit of dopamine, right? And you feel good, but then you start to feel bad again. And to avoid that bad feeling, you do more of the same thing you just did because it worked for you. Yeah. And if you look at any type of behavior at all, it's all, you really want to look at the underlying function or the underlying why a person did that particular behavior at that particular moment. What are they getting from it? And that's where kind of the deeper work comes in. And so for someone like Amanda, typically when you have somebody who engages in these type of, again, call it what you want, manipulative, narcissistic, whatever the case may be, when they engage in these behaviors to the point where they take on this alternative identity. In order for that to happen, your sense of self really needs to be non-existent, right? So you kind of are like this chameleon where you shift into what you need to be around certain people, right? She maybe is different around you than she is around this person or this person, because in those moments, she's probably very skilled at being able to read the situation to figure out what those person's needs are, and
mirror that.
Almost. And mirror that, right? Yeah. And so she makes herself needed. And I always say this, right? Like I have a bias sample. So I put that out there, right? You work with a bias sample, right? But most people are good people, right? Most people don't want to hurt other people. And I think with this situation, what maybe not that it's right, but from what I hear you saying is that it's something that started for one reason, took on this identity. It made her feel like somebody, where the lack of awareness is and the lack of accountability is that really at no time, and from what I could see from the show, of the podcast, at no time was there a willingness to take accountability and sit with the discomfort of what you had done until you got caught. Yeah. And then once you get caught, now you want to look like you're sorry, right? And you want to appear as if you are accountable and empathetic and all of those things, because it makes you what people need from you. We need to hear, I'm sorry. We need to hear, I can't believe I did this to my children. We need to hear that, or else it messes with our idea of trust and just human existence, right? And so she said what was needed to be said. Whether she feels that way or not, I have no idea, and it's not for me to say. But it kind of begs the question of, is she accountable? Is she taking accountability because she's taking accountability, or is she taking accountability because she got caught? And then is this type of behavior, if we look at function, if we take the behavior away of saying you have cancer, because that's off the table now, right? Like that can't happen again. No one's going to believe an illness that you have. And even if you do have it, no one's going to give you money. We think, maybe, who knows? But do you think that this type of behavior dressed up in a different way could happen again? In a different.
Yeah, I totally get what you mean. And I love your explanation. Like, I'm so grateful for that as well. Because I think sometimes I'm paranoid of being like, I'm not justifying it. I'm not saying, because, it's really wrong what Amanda did. And, I've sat with all those people she hurt and have that trust with them and can feel their pain so deeply, and also the emotional and visceral reaction that people have had from the podcast and the docuseries. And that's really important to acknowledge. But yeah, the curiosity of Amanda is, everybody's got it, no matter what you think about her. I totally see your point, and you know, I don't know. Yes, cancer is off the table. I do think, I'll be careful how I say this because I don't want it to sound like, oh, look at me. But I do think the podcast and the docuseries and the amount of people that have been talking about this has, you know, just my opinion, made Amanda realize maybe how big her actions have been, because there's prison and then there's everybody in the world knowing about what you've done.
Yes.
And, you know, of course, prison and justice is really important in terms of the
She
law.
called that out, though. Her biggest, my perception is that her biggest concern was the amount of hate from others, the social media hate she's getting. It was more about that than it was, I'm away from my kids for X amount of time. That I found interesting. She was very, at least that was part
before, of it. That was before the podcast came out, though. And it was before the docuseries came out, because she's not had access to social media.
No, her fear. Her fear.
Yeah.
Her fear of what was going to, you know, her fear of.
Yeah, what people are going to think.
Retaliation. What were people going to think? Yeah. She went from the nobody to this, you know, person who. So.
Yeah, I see your point. Yeah.
Do you think that's something that's almost weighs the most on her?
I think it's changed over time. I think now, from what I have seen, I think it's so many things. I think it's like the realization of how awful it is, the thing that she's done, and that she's got to live with that. If she does have, I don't know, empathy, is that the right word? Like she does have, empathy.
That's the question. Is there empathy or not? Yeah.
That's very hard to live with. And that's why, I mean, you're the expert on this, but that's why narcissistic behavior or narcissist, I'm not saying Amanda's a narcissist, but some of her behavior was narcissistic. They, in my experience, and I was raised with a narcissist, don't ever admit what they've done, ever. And they will literally die that they're the victim. So I don't know, because from what I've seen of Amanda, like, I think the reality of what she's done is she's got to live with if she allows that emotion in. I have seen her very upset, and it's not up to me, it's up to the public and everybody else to decide whether that's real or not. I'm just passing on what I've seen, and I think the children is a big part of it. I know that she's been currently, over the last year, fighting that with her husband because they're getting divorced, and again, like the comments you made are, and she did say those things, were like a couple of years ago. So I do wonder that the extent of everything that's happened now, because her name is massively out there. And it's really interesting, because I did have a few comments saying, like, you know, you've given her a platform. And I'm like, no, I haven't given her a platform, like at all. I've actually made sure that, I mean, her name is everywhere, and she
an interesting comment.
Yeah, she won't be able to do it again. And actually, it raised the awareness.
That's right.
Because, you know, the way that the system works, especially in the US, is if that wasn't the case, then maybe Amanda could go to a different state and people wouldn't know. So I totally, you know, that comment is valid. That's somebody's opinion, but I totally disagree with it.
I agree. I would agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, and so I don't know. I'm beating around the bush because it's a hard one.
No, I think you're right. I think it's about awareness. It's about educating and awareness. It's not giving her a platform to do more damage. It's actually giving her a platform to prevent that from happening, to educate people on what to look for.
Yeah. And there is no way that, like, I I am so convinced there is no way for a second that Amanda is enjoying this. Like,
No.
this is not, she is not sat
yeah.
there going, ooh, people talking about me. I promise you that is one thing I am absolutely certain of. And that's why she didn't want to be part of the documentary. And she wasn't happy that there was going to be a visual documentary as well. And it's not going away. People are still talking about it. So she's not sat there going, you know, people see her as a monster. That's not something Amanda wants.
Do you think part of it too is there's a lot of control issues, obviously, in this, you know, controlling a narrative, controlling people's perceptions. And she could do that for a very long time by faking this and the blogs and the sympathy and all of that. Do you think part of it, other than the obvious of your name being out there and people saying horrific things about you, do you think that part of it is that she no longer can control her narrative? It's totally out of her control now.
Yeah. It's totally out of her control. That's a good question as well. I think, you know, it's interesting that she hasn't decided to say anything. And that is a conversation like I have had with her. Like I asked her if she wanted to be interviewed for the podcast, and I asked her if she wanted to be interviewed for the docuseries. And, you know, maybe we will hear from her. I think that would be interesting and important for people to hear from her, whether they want to believe or not. Because the only person really we haven't heard from in this is Amanda. We've heard from her through her writing, obviously. But yeah, sorry, I've totally forgot the question now.
No, that's okay.
I'm thinking about everything that all the conversations I've had and like trying to kind of analyze it, which I have done a lot myself as well.
Why do you think she agreed to speak with you?
I think initially it was because I didn't approach her in an aggressive way and go, you did this, you did that, which is not my job. And it's also not who I am as a person. I could never be that type of person, because also you would not know about Scamanda. None of you would, if I'd have done that, because it wouldn't have been you wouldn't have enjoyed that story. You wouldn't have been so fascinated by it if I'd have just been like, this woman did this, and I'd have just been accusing and judgmental. Like you'd have just been like, oh my God, I'm not listening to this, or I'm not watching this. The whatever you want to call me, like the host, the journalist, the producer, she's like so judgmental. Like you wouldn't have wanted to hear that. So I think initially it was more like, look, Amanda, I'm doing this. And I was super honest with her, which I am. I'm so honest to a fault sometimes. I told her exactly what I was thinking, what I was doing. At the time I hadn't really, you know, I was just still kind of trying to put things together, research, trying to figure out like how I was going to do this. And I knew straight away, though, that I was going to use her blog post. Like I knew immediately, like when I sat with her blog post, I was like, I could see exactly how I was going to lay it out. But I just mean in terms of like the investigation. Because there was still some pieces that were missing, and to try and understand why, to try and understand the family dynamic, Corey, her husband at the time. So
that I have so many questions about.
I think so on that question, I know so many people have. That's the biggest question. So on that, on your question about Amanda, I think it was that I was honest. I worked, you know, she didn't just decide to speak to me. It was a lot of back and forth to try and show her that, you know, I wasn't, you know, my reasoning to speak to her was also to make sure that I was getting the right story here. Like, what if there was more to the story? What if she was coercively controlled? What if it was important for me to not judge her and try and understand to see if there was anything else? Because what if I'd missed that? What if I'd have put this out there and she hadn't been coercively controlled? That, you know, I advocate for that. I advocate for anybody that's being coercive controlled, men or women, but I do advocate for women. And so
really good point. Really good point.
My head as a journalist can't just be assuming that I know, you know, because of my own bias, you know, so I have to look at things. And also I thought it was important for the listeners, the viewers, and the victims. They wanted to know what she got to say. And that's important, because was she sorry? Was she not sorry? You know, what kind of person is she? You know, I've tried to show you as much as I can of her, but, you know, we haven't heard it from the horse's mouth. And I think, you know, because of that approach, I think that's why. And she wasn't giving me loads of information. It was just like, look, I'm doing this. This is what's going to happen. And then it became, you know, a bit more where, I would be like, look, do you want, look, this is what's happening and this is the reaction. Like, if you want to, I'm here. If you want to tell me why. It's not for her to say, I didn't do it. Of course, if she had said to me, I didn't do it, no way. That's not, you know, this is not, again, like giving somebody the law's the law. Yeah. She's spent time in prison. She absolutely did it. And she's not denying that. And that was important for me. Like, she didn't deny it. She didn't say, I didn't do it. It was all wrong. That would be a very different type of person, you know, and I'm sure you could explain that. It is your expertise, like that, but that's not Amanda. And it was important, again, like, I hope people understand, but my job is also to, you know, to give her an opportunity to speak if she wants to. And also the victims wanted to know if she was sorry and why. And so, like, I feel super passionate about that. Sorry, I don't know why.
No, listen, it's your job. I mean, that's what you do. And if you weren't passionate about it, I think you're absolutely right. We wouldn't have gotten the story the way that you gave it, and people wouldn't have been so in tune to it. They wouldn't have been able to relate to it. I think you would have made their emotional decisions for them ahead of time, and you didn't do that.
Yeah, thank you.
I know other people have this question. I have this burning question about her husband, about Corey. What and how and where and how did he not know, and what did he know, and what's his role? And it leaves me very unsettled.
Yeah, I think it does everyone. And I think we all, including myself, had the same question or have the same question. I do have to say that Corey wasn't convicted of the crime or anything that Amanda did. But he was a husband throughout that whole period. He was going through a custody battle, and Amanda's cancer was used in that custody battle. He claimed bankruptcy.
He has a daughter, for those listening. He has a daughter with a first wife.
Yes, he does.
Who he so yes. So that's the custody that
he was going through a custody battle with his ex-wife to do with his daughter, who became Amanda's stepdaughter, who Amanda referred to as a bonus daughter. And cancer was part of that conversation, or Amanda's medical bills and cancer. And he also claimed bankruptcy twice due to Amanda's medical bills, and also said under oath that he attended all his wife's, Amanda, medical appointments. And I say all that as fact, so you can decide, you can be your own investigators and decide what you want to infer from those facts.
Isn't that interesting?
Interesting. Yeah. And also, I can tell you now, sorry, I've just had a equipment malfunction. Okay. But I can tell you that Corey and Amanda are divorcing, and that Corey is in a relationship now with a younger woman, and I'll leave it at that. Obviously, there's no judgment there. This is just about a pattern of behavior that I'm just very subtly pointing out, and that's all I will say. I'm working on something at the moment that I can't wait for you all to consume. I was trying not to give a clue what it is. Consume. What a weird word to use. And it's the same. Like, I don't want to tell you what to think. Like, I know, maybe somebody, like, that's not what I want to do. I want you to make your own minds up, because we're all different, and it's not for me to tell you. We're all, we can all make our own minds up and decide. And I don't want to shove it down your throat and tell you what you should think. I want to present as much as I can. And then you can decide what you think. And people think differently. Some people think she's an absolute monster. Some people can see the complexities. And it's not for me to tell you that. It's just for me to show you. But I think Amanda trusted me because I wasn't being salacious. It's not my style. I was presenting the facts. And, I was very clear with her as well. There was no, I wasn't going, I was very clear. I was like, look, this is, what you did to these victims, and I think maybe in some way, like I said, like me talking to her and her seeing the reaction has made her realize, because I do feel there was some kind of cognitive dissonance.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, in it, that she didn't quite see how big it was that she's done.
I agree.
But I think she really can now. But I think there was an element of that. And I think, you probably can explain cognitive dissonance better than me, but I think we all can have an element of doing it. We can all do it. We're all capable of doing it, where we can convince ourselves of something else, of a different narrative, so that we don't have to face the reality of what it might be. And I remember doing this show, sorry, slight change of subjects, but I was doing a show called Surviving El Chapo, and it was with the Flores twins, and I worked on it with me and 50 Cent partners. And I remember speaking to the Flores twins, and they were, yeah, but we didn't kill anybody. I'm like, well, okay. But basically they were drug traffickers. I should have explained that. And I was like, well, but you did. And they went, no, but we didn't. And we're businessmen. And I was like, yeah, but like, and at the time, somebody in my family had sadly passed away, and drugs were involved. And it was really difficult for me, because I was like, okay. And I said, no, but you did. And I really challenged them. And they were like, oh my God. And then they revealed that their brother had actually died of an overdose. And it was just like the most powerful and fascinating conversation, because in their head, they convinced themselves that they were just businessmen.
Yes.
And as a way to almost justify what they were doing. And I do think there's an element of that with Amanda, where it's like, oh no, but I didn't murder anybody. I only took 100,000, like it wasn't millions. And actually, like, it was only, I'm not saying she's saying those things, but I think that you can justify things in your head to help you, I don't know, more
live with it
and not
live
face
with what
your
you
morals.
did.
Yeah. And then also like, if you think of to me, it always reminds me of like, sometimes when we're in a really bad relationship or an unhealthy relationship, and the severity of it with domestic abuse, we can, again, obviously there's a lot of manipulative behaviors and control going on in those situations, but sometimes in an unhealthy relationship, you can convince yourself that, oh no, it's fine. Or I'm not doing this. And that's kind of how I'd explain cognitive dissonance. And I think there was a little bit of that with Amanda, where you can convince yourself of a false narrative. Like, our brains are so like clever.
That's why I do what I do. It's fascinating. I find human behavior fascinating, because the extent that people will go to justify their actions, and really, when I say go with, they really accept that as their truth. And the reason being so that they don't have to sit with the repercussions or sit with the reality of what they're doing, because it's too much.
Yeah, it's too much to look in the mirror and go, oh my God, like, I'm an absolute piece of shit. That's right. I did that. It's hard for people to face. Like, it takes a lot to look in the mirror and be accountable for your own behaviors. And so the easiest way is to then blame somebody else and convince yourself that you didn't do it.
Or it wasn't that bad, or there's people that have done worse things than you. And absolutely. I agree with that. I like the way you said that, because I would imagine that played a very big role in this as well. Again, not what she did. What she did was wrong. That goes without saying. How people, I can imagine people watching it going, she just kept going. She just kept going. And one of the reasons behind why she kept going, in addition to, she took on the identity, and we talked about, the dopamine hits and having, it's kind of addictive quality to it. but it's also this, it's the reality of it has become so far gone for her that she doesn't see it as it is. She sees it as something way less significant with way fewer consequences, and definitely way fewer far-reaching consequences. I mean, I think to her, she looked at it as this small circle of supporters, but it's so much bigger than that. I mean, it really is. And I think that's the hard thing for people to wrap their brains around, is just the as I said before, the betrayal trauma, the rocking your foundation to its core. I mean, it jolts you. It's jarring.
Yeah.
I think, and the dichotomy between who she presents and what she did, it's jarring, because we see people like her all the time in our lives.
Yeah. Yeah,
so
we do. sadly we do. But I do think there are red flags and understanding of behavior that we can learn, which can help us. But I also feel like one thing I wanted to try and achieve with this, which is why I worked so hard on the nuance, is because I want to show people that there is no shame in being lied to, duped, manipulated, because it's not on you, on us, on the victim. And I think we all take that on so much. And I remember speaking to so many victims, and so many of them were like, am I naive? Like, and we're embarrassed and ashamed. And but none of their actions were anything to do with what was wrong. And isn't it interesting how we take that on? And so many of us, I'd say millions of us, have been scammed or conned or manipulated, whatever the words we want to use. Because I don't know, I'm a bit funny about scams sometimes, even though I called it Scamanda, because I'm like, it wasn't like, so to me, scam is like, oh, I don't know, somebody's on the phone trying to get my money. Whereas this is like deep, like you said, betrayal, manipulation, friendships, family. This is a tale of friendships too, which I love, because we don't hear enough about that, I think, in storytelling, and especially female friendships. But anyway, all I wanted to say is also I wanted to show that there is no shame about being duped or scammed. And like, sometimes these people are just, contradicting myself, because I'm like, there are red flags and there are things, which there are, that we should.
They're so good at this.
But that some people can just be so good. And I do think that was in Amanda's case. Whatever the psychology is, whatever the why, at the end of the day, like, it was really hard to spot that this was a lie. And also, even when it was, like, do you want to be the person that accuses a young woman who's a mother of two, that's got cancer, and that's fighting, that's a stand-up citizen in her community and representing this hope? And no, you don't. And also, why would that even enter your head to question it? And I think that's important to put, when people watch it, like, put yourself in that position. Why would you ever question it? 2020 hindsight is a beautiful thing. And also, the other point I wanted to make is, even when there was a lot of evidence that was then, the police looked at, the police actually couldn't really do anything about it. And what I also really love about what I've done, and I'm proud of, is that I do know that, the police were even listening to the podcast and using it as an example of how to stop these people. Because again, like, this is something that I have actually done a lot of campaigning on, not to do with Scamanda, but previously, around the law, and how the law is so old-fashioned and adversarial, and it so often doesn't take into account these human behavioral, psychological crimes, which are so damaging, and they don't take into account the impact on people's lives.
I mean, that is a whole other topic.
Yeah, exactly. That's part two in our conversation.
That's part two. I had done a whole episode with Laura Richards on this, who talks a lot about all of these nuanced, coercively controlled type behaviors that law enforcement is missing.
Yes,
because of the training is still. And I mean, we see this, the Gabby Petito, we see this all the time. if we are so close with these people and we're missing it, right? Because, for gaslighting, manipulative behaviors, coercive control, it is so subtle.
Yeah.
That it's like a leaky faucet. You don't pay attention to it until you're drowning and you have no idea how you got there.
Yeah.
And law enforcement is just seeing a snapshot of this without the underlying nuances of it. And coercive control, especially in domestic violence, we see this all the time. They're not picking up on these signs. And so it's really, really difficult. And it's easy to say, I can't believe I didn't see that. Am I dumb? I can't. That happens all the time. And you were made not to see it. It was very carefully constructed so that you wouldn't be able to see that. Yeah. And you bring up a really good point. It didn't even occur to me that even if you thought there was a chance that she was lying, what kind of person would you be if you called out somebody lying about cancer and they're not? Like, it's such a I would imagine people would have a really difficult time doing that. Plus, they're continuously being gaslit. There's a community of supporters who are continuously supporting her. So you're going to out her in the face of that. It's just constant gaslighting. It's so difficult to be the one to come out and say something. So the shame that people may have for not doing that, if you're listening, don't. It was not even in the cards for you to be able to see what was happening. That's the whole point. It was so carefully constructed.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't say, you said it the best. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it's really important. It's really important to get that out. It really is. And I think also, even in the story of Scamanda, Nancy, who did phone some people in her community and did start to try and tell people, people were like, who is this awful person that's accusing our friends? So, why would you believe somebody you don't know over your friends who you've known for years and you see every day, who presents with that? And by the way, who you've also seen in hospital. Never mind pictures, people actually seen her in hospital. So I think, if we really look to the detail of this, like it's very hard to see why. And again, the police, the amazing Detective Martinez, like he had so many cases and he chose to take this on because he felt so emotionally connected to it as well. And even when he did, he even couldn't access her medical records to prove it and had to get the IRS involved. So yes, it just shows it's like a tangled web and it's complicated because of, the law being very black and white still.
Yeah, absolutely. Charlie, I know you have to get ready. So I want to make sure.
I want to keep on talking to you as well.
I know. We totally do this again. I have so many other things I can.
I know. It's great talking to you as well because you also really understand that because of what you do, you understand the psychology of it and the nuance to it.
So, all right, I'll close out. I want people to be able to find you.
Sorry. So, got everything you need.
I just want to kind of close out and just have you tell people where. So Charlie, tell everyone where they can find you, where they can watch, listen to Scamanda, where they can see more of your work.
I'm on Instagram. I'm trying to be better at TikTok, but I'm so bad at it. So if anybody wants to help me, let me know. My Instagram is
same.
So yeah, I'm like, oh god,
so bad at it.
I barely have enough time to wash my hair at the moment. No, that's so dramatic. Charlie Webster is my Instagram, and I would love to hear from you. I go through phases and try and get back to everyone as much as I can. I also have a book out, which you can learn more about me, why it's okay to talk about trauma. And it's a book that hopefully is very, well, I don't want it to be relatable for people because I don't want them to have gone through trauma, but I feel like it really speaks to the reality of it and to help people understand how to work through it. And it's very, very real. But it is the process of working through trauma. And I've got Scamanda is on Disney Plus in the rest of the world. And in the US, it's on ABC and Hulu. And also you can listen to the podcast. I'd say if you just listen to one or watch the other, do both if you're interested to, because I think they give you different things. That's what we worked really hard at. So the podcast is just on everywhere you get podcasts, and the TV show in the US is on ABC and Hulu. And
Thank you.
I won't add any more.
Yeah. No, this was great. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Next Up Narcissism. I hope you found it useful, but most importantly, I hope you found it validating. Want to work one-on-one with me? Visit my website at drjamiezuckerman.com to book a personalized coaching session, and be sure to check out my on-demand workshops on topics like co-parenting with a narcissist, life after leaving, anxiety management strategies, and more. Again, that's drjamiezuckerman.com. You'll also find links to my interactive workbooks, merchandise, resources, and newsletter sign-up. Next Up Narcissism is as much your podcast as it is mine. I want to hear your feedback and what you want to hear. So make sure to leave a podcast review wherever you listen, or send an email to nextup@drjamiezuckerman.com. Again, that's nextup@drjamiezuckerman.com. Be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Make sure to tune in next week to see what's up next on Next Up Narcissism.